Hello, I'm Steve Barsick Amstel with High Tech Design Safety. This is our ongoing video series about SEMI S2 and the evaluation process and how to get through it easier and quickly. This is section 9 of SEMI S2, documentation provided to the user. Next is environmental information. So there's a lot of sections here. Starts off with energy usage. This typically is very lacking for most companies because you don't really know how hard somebody's going to use your equipment. You might have a baseline number at idle and during operation for any given piece of equipment so that you could have some idea of power consumption. And this part of S2 is actually really looking for, as you get later into the meat of the standard, how much you've been able to reduce energy consumption in your equipment over time, which is great marketing information, really. And how you've been able to lower that so it lowers the cost of operating the equipment and maybe even lowers your cost of parts, and we'll see how that all works out. But once you have all that energy information, then you can actually say, yes, we've done it and we have a program that's accomplishing it. Next level up is really, do you actually have a program that even looks at that? Typically, most people do. Next is chemical information, and the first thing they're looking for there is mass balance. So meaning whatever consumption the equipment has. So any clean, dry air, how much consumption over a period of time of that, nitrogen, cooling water, city water, DI water, all those things. And then any chemicals that go in react and come out the other end using a baseline process. And the data needed there is to understand what goes in, what's coming out, and how it might need to be treated on the other end, how you might need to deal with hazards. Further, within this chemical usage information, we're going to want to see that you communicate any service items, like any cleaners or anything used to operate the equipment, lubricants, cooling fluids, all those things. And then anything that might become hazardous or solid waste, non-hazardous solid waste, like filter cartridges, O-rings, lamps that may or may not have mercury in them, on and on and on. Anything that's a consumable in the product that will be thrown away later, what is that and what is the hazard of it? That all needs to be communicated as well. And summarized, because it may be in all the manuals of all the subsystems you use, but it really does need to be in one concise table. So whoever's getting the equipment really knows what their hazardous waste program on the end would be and during service. So going on with the chemical information needed to be provided, the first one now is later in section 9, unintended release. So what we mean is, where could an unwelded fitting open and release chemical from inside the containment? So it might go into an enclosure, a ventilated enclosure, it might go into a tank, a sump, a drain. Where does it go if it's released? What is it and how much? So that would be, let's say, for example, you have an overpressure valve that's going to release pressure from your chemical system. That fails, and you have another valve that opens or a fitting that opens, and that's a 2-point failure. So let's just cut that back and say a single point failure of a fitting somewhere in the system, not a welded connection, but something that's a screw-on or other type of fitting, could open or leak. If it did, where is it, how much could it be, and how is it mitigated? For all unintended releases, not just liquids, so gases, solids maybe, slurries, any other thing that could be unintentionally released from the equipment. And then obvious, the next side of that is, what are your intended releases? So there's a drain here, what's going down it, part of the mass balance, what is it, where is it going, what it needs to be connected to, and what's the typical maximum flow rate and maybe an average flow rate. Does any abatement need to be done on that line, that drain line, or on that exhaust line? Any of them. all that information would be in here. Solid waste is the next one in section 9, and it talks about what does become solid waste. So when you're done with the shipping the equipment to the person, there's going to be a bill of materials for the crate and everything else. What is it? What's in it? What are the hazards of it? Are there any? Your crate should be marked with weights and lift points and all that, but that's another standard too. And that information as well should be communicated. And then during normal operation, what becomes solid waste? Maybe it's some consumable of some type that gets thrown away, or it's a O-ring or light bulb or whatever, as I mentioned earlier, but this kind is really the non-hazardous ones. And that wraps up this part of section 9, and we'll continue with the next part of section 9 in our next video.